Not only those outside the tradition misunderstand, but even those within the tradition also have misunderstandings. Even during the Buddha's time, there were disciples who misunderstood him. Many misinterpreted his teachings on the impurity of the body to the point where they committed suicide. Therefore, occasionally in the scriptures, we hear the Buddha lament, "I did not say that. I did not teach that. I did not promote the doctrine of nihilism and annihilation." It is natural that Western scholars misunderstand the Buddha's teachings while studying Buddhism. We misinterpret the Buddha and then incorrectly pass on his teachings, leading to misunderstandings among future generations. Many misunderstand nirvana as eternal death, while nirvana is the great happiness of those who are liberated, a happiness that we can enjoy here and now because we are free, especially free from concepts. Chapter 1. The Buddha achieved enlightenment about the mind, not about the world and the universe. Science and the Buddha share the same goal, a singular desire to end suffering. However, science, with its understanding based on the principle that the mind knows objects, has assumed that reality is the material world. Dominated by this understanding, suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to end suffering, the Four Noble Truths, are seen as belonging to the external world. Specifically, suffering, the cause of suffering, and the cessation of suffering are believed to depend on the world, on life circumstances. Naturally, the path to ending suffering involves changing the world, changing life circumstances. It is through this understanding that science strives to explore the material world in order to change the world, circumstances, and living conditions to end human suffering. Reality is perception. Albert Einstein, an unwavering pillar in the history of science, marked a turning point for humanity with his theory of general relativity, ushering in a new era in how humans understand the universe. He discovered that time and space are not separate entities, but transform according to the position and velocity of the observer. The equation E equals mc squared is not just a formula, it is a powerful statement of the unity between matter and energy, opening new doors for physical science. But Einstein was not just a scientist, he was also a great philosopher and thinker, transcending the boundaries of scientific theory to seek harmony between science, philosophy, and religion. His view of religion was not blind faith, but a profound sense of order and wonder in the universe, reflecting a soul always in search of beauty and truth. Through his way of connecting science with philosophy and religion, Einstein became a symbol of endless exploration and the desire to understand the world around us. Chapter 2. The 14 questions to which the Buddha remained silent. There was a disciple of the Buddha named Malunkyaputta who often asked questions about the world, the future, and the nature of existence. Questions of a metaphysical nature such as, is the world eternal, or will it be destroyed one day? Is the world limited, or is it unlimited, finite, or infinite? Typically, the Buddha did not respond to such questions, which made Malunkyaputta angry, and he said, "If the Buddha does not answer me, then I will stop practicing." The Buddha then called Malunkyaputta and said, "Did I promise you when you became a monk that I would answer such questions?" "No, the Venerable One did not promise such a thing. Then why do you say that if I do not answer these questions, you will give up your practice?" The Buddha then told a story about a man who was struck by a poisoned arrow. When a doctor was called to treat him, the wounded man said, "Wait, first I want to know who shot me, what his name is, why he shot me, whether he has any grudge against me or my family. I want to know all of this before agreeing to be treated." The doctor replied, "If you spend your time trying to find all these answers, you will die from the poison before all your questions are answered." The Buddha taught, we all have suffering and pain. If we only focus on asking such questions, then those sufferings and pains will never be healed. Therefore, I only teach what is beneficial to help you transform and heal the suffering and pain that you have. Einstein denied the existence of a personal God, but could not provide answers about the beauty and systematic nature of the universe. He expressed it as follows: "I do not believe in a personal God and have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. If there is anything in me that could be called religious, it is the limitless admiration for the structure of the world as far as our science can reveal it. I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmonious order of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and actions of humanity." Albert Einstein, 1954. The categories of existence and non-existence in Buddhism. The Buddha's teaching is practical. The Blessed One only taught about suffering and methods to transform suffering. Metaphysical questions, although he could answer them, were left unanswered because he knew they were not beneficial for practitioners. Additionally, some questions cannot be answered not because the Blessed One did not know the answers, but because those questions cannot be addressed within the categories of existence and non-existence. At that time, the Buddha was in Kosambi. One day after walking, he held a handful of simsapa leaves in his hand, lifted them up, and asked the monks, "Monks, which are more numerous, the leaves in my hand or the leaves in the forest?" The monks replied, "Venerable One, the leaves in the forest are much more numerous than the leaves in your hand." The Blessed One said, "In the same way, what I know is like the leaves in the forest, but what I have taught is only like the leaves in my hand. Why? Because what I teach is very important for helping you transform and heal, while what does not help in transformation and healing I do not teach." This story demonstrates that the Buddha's teaching has a very practical purpose. We should dedicate our time to transformation and healing. However, people, including kings, ministers, and even the Buddha's disciples, like to ask metaphysical questions. There are a total of 14 unanswered questions, meaning those questions that the Buddha never intended to answer. Questions about the universe and the world. Is it eternal? Is it not eternal? Is it both eternal and not eternal? Is it neither eternal nor not eternal? The Buddha did not answer these questions because any proposition among these four is incorrect. These four propositions are called the tetrad, and the Buddha's wisdom transcends the tetrad, known as the abandonment of the tetrad. Is it finite? Is it infinite? Is it both finite and infinite? Is it neither finite nor infinite? The Buddha also did not answer these four questions because they are considered avyakarta, or indeterminate. Questions about the Buddha, Tathagata, after death. Does he exist? Does he not exist? Does he both exist and not exist? Does he neither exist nor not exist? Questions about the soul and the body. Are they one? Are they two? Louis de la Vallée-Poussin was a Belgian Buddhist scholar. He extensively studied Buddhism and was proficient in Chinese, Sanskrit, and Pali. He taught at the Institut Catholique Paris in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and translated works such as Vasubandhu's Abhidharmakosa Sastra and Xuanzang's Cheng Wei Lun. He raised the issue that the Buddha refused to answer certain questions. Now that he has departed, we must accept this. This implies that there are things the Buddha kept to himself and refused to reveal. He noted contradictions between the Buddha's teachings and philosophy and raised three issues. Issue 1. The mechanism of karmic retribution and rebirth. The Buddha did not clearly explain the mechanism of karmic retribution and rebirth. Without a self or ego, who creates karma and who receives its results? The belief in reincarnation and karma is understandable in Brahmanism because there is an Atman or self. Jiva, the vital principle, is life, it is the soul. So are the soul and the body or form one or two? For this Buddhist scholar, the mechanism of karmic retribution and rebirth was not clearly explained by the Buddha, as Buddhism advocates for anatta, or non-self. Without a self, how can karma and rebirth be explained? Who creates karma? Who receives its results? Who suffers rebirth? These are questions that Louis de la Vallée-Poussin raised in his last book, Le Dogme et la Philosophie du Bouddhisme, The Dogma and Philosophy of Buddhism. After translating the Kosa treatise and the Cheng Wei Lun, he still had such questions. Issue 2. The nature of the soul. The Buddha did not clarify the nature of the entity undergoing rebirth, the soul. Who experiences rebirth? Issue 3. Nirvana. The Buddha did not clarify whether nirvana is a realm or not. Where is this realm located? How do we reach it? For the scholar, the nature of nirvana is unclear, but in my opinion, the Buddha spoke very clearly about nirvana. We must also examine scholars' questions to find ways to explain to those studying Buddhism later. The sutras mention two types of non-self. Personal non-self. The term person refers to human beings. Non-self is nairatmya. Upon closer examination within us, there is no self, meaning there is no entity that exists in an immutable and perpetual way. The self is defined as something permanent and unchanging. If we analyze a person, we find 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. All these 5 aggregates are impermanent, changing every moment. Nothing is immutable, from physical form to sensations, cognitions, and consciousness. These 5 streams are always flowing. Nothing is permanent and eternal. So how can there be a self beyond these 5 aggregates? Dharmic non-self, or dharma-nairatmya. Looking at objects like this table, that mountain, or that river, we also find nothing permanent or eternal. Therefore, there is no self in human beings, nor in objects. Impermanence is the starting point. Everything is changing. All phenomena are subject to instantaneous birth and death, meaning phenomena change at every moment. Phenomena are like frames in a movie. Many people feel something negative when they hear about impermanence. But in reality, without impermanence, how could there be life? It is due to impermanence that life exists. If there were a button that, when pressed, would stop the world, everything would freeze, and there would be no life. Just like when a movie is paused, all activities and images freeze. Life exists because of impermanence. Without impermanence, a kernel of corn would remain a kernel of corn forever. We would never have corn plants or corn to eat. If things were not impermanent, a baby would always be a baby and never grow up. If everything were not impermanent, being sick would mean being sick forever without recovery. Impermanence is wonderful, but why do we feel something negative and pessimistic about impermanence when we hear about it? The truth is that impermanence is the basis of life. Without impermanence, there would be no life. Therefore, saying that impermanence is suffering is incorrect. The sutras often repeat the story that the Buddha told to a disciple. The Buddha asked, "Are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness permanent or impermanent?" The disciple answered, "Impermanent." The Buddha asked, "If they are impermanent, are they suffering or happiness?" The disciple answered, "Impermanence is suffering." This was not the Buddha's intention, but the result of distorted transmission. The Buddha had very intelligent disciples, but also some who were not. Impermanence leads to suffering was not the Buddha's intention. Without impermanence, how could we attain enlightenment, remaining always in ignorance for thousands of years? Only with impermanence can afflictions become enlightenment. Impermanence is the root of transformation and peace. People are obsessed with the idea of suffering, samsara, and have distorted the Buddha's teachings. By principle, the conversation between the Buddha and his disciple should be, is form permanent or impermanent? Venerable Honored One, it is impermanent. If it is impermanent, is there a self? Venerable Honored One, there is no self. Impermanence means non-self because the self is something permanent, a proprietor. Therefore, non-self and impermanence are one. If something is impermanent, it is non-self. The soul is not a permanent self. Saying that the soul and the body are one is incorrect, and saying that they are two is also incorrect because there is no such permanent and unchanging soul. In the Milindapanya Sutra, there is a dialogue between the Venerable Nagasena and King Milinda, or Menander. The king asked, "Venerable Sir, are the soul and the body one or two?" Faithful to the spirit of the Buddha's teachings, Nagasena did not answer. King Milinda said, "You agreed to answer any question I asked. Why do you not answer now?" Nagasena asked, "Your Majesty, is the mango in your royal garden sweet or sour?" The king could not answer because there were no mango trees in his garden. Nagasena said, "In the same way, how can we discuss whether the immortal soul and the body are one or two when there is no such immortal soul?" This is a brilliant response. There is nothing permanent and unchanging. There is no self, therefore, discussing whether the soul is one with the form or different is incorrect. For example, a person performs an action in the year 2000, let's call them the actor. By 2013, the result arrives and we call the person who receives the result the receiver. People ask the Buddha, is the actor and the receiver the same person or two different people? From a conventional understanding, according to conventional truth, the actor and the receiver are one. The person who plants corn harvests corn, the person who plants beans harvests beans, the person who plants the wind harvests the storm. But from the perspective of ultimate truth, this is not the case, because everything is impermanent and changes. From 2000 to 2013, that person has changed significantly in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Comparing the actor with the receiver, we see that they are very different. Saying that the two are one leads to a mistaken view called eternalism, clinging to the self. But saying that they are two different people leads to another mistaken view called annihilationism. Therefore, the Buddha said, "I avoid these two extremes and teach the Dharma from the middle way. The middle way transcends these extremes." Thus, the 14 questions cannot be answered because they all imply that the world, the Tathagata, or the soul is something permanent with a self. If the world is impermanent and changing, then saying that the world is permanent is incorrect, saying that it is not permanent is also incorrect, saying that it is both permanent and not permanent is incorrect, and saying that it is neither not permanent nor not permanent is also incorrect. If the world is non-self, with nothing eternal and unchanging, then saying that the world is finite is incorrect, saying that it is infinite is also incorrect, saying that it is both finite and infinite is incorrect, and saying that it is neither infinite nor not infinite is also incorrect because one is still trapped in the concept of a self. By understanding personal non-self and dharmic non-self, we know that the previously posed questions are wrong. Just like the question King Milinda asked Nagasena, are the body and the soul one or two? Without an immortal soul, without a self, how can we answer one or two? Not answering does not mean ignorance, but from the middle way, we see that these mental categories cannot convey the truth. Categories such as existence, non-existence, birth, death, presence, absence, subject, and object are all mental categories. Using these to arrive at an answer is incorrect. Therefore, none of the 14 questions are answered, as any answer would deviate from the middle way, and the middle way is about escaping from erroneous views, including views of existence, non-existence, permanence, annihilation, coming, going, one, and different. In the Katyayana Sutra, the Buddha said that right view is to see beyond the categories of existence and non-existence. To transcend the categories of existence and non-existence is also to transcend the categories of birth and death. In the Anuruddha Sutra, the Venerable Anuruddha was stopped by teachers of other sects who asked, "After the Blessed One passes away, does he exist or not exist, or both exist and not exist, or neither exist nor not exist? You must answer one of these four propositions." Anuruddha refused. "The Blessed One, my teacher, never taught me to respond to any of these four categories. He said that such questions are avyakarta, unanswerable." The teachers of other sects thought that Anuruddha was new to practice and could not answer their question, so they let him go. Anuruddha returned to the Buddha and recounted the story. "Venerable Blessed One, this morning I was stopped by teachers of other sects and asked this question, and I responded in this way. Please instruct me so that next time I can give a better answer if I am stopped again." The Buddha taught very clearly, "Now, Anuradha, I am sitting in front of you, look at me and answer, is the Tathagata this form, venerable blessed one? No. Then do you mean that the Tathagata exists outside of form? Also no. Can the Tathagata be found in feeling? No. Can the Tathagata be found outside of feeling?" The Buddha asked Anuradha questions like these, moving from form to feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The Buddha said, "Now, Anuradha, I am sitting right here and you cannot find me. You cannot find a Tathagata who is permanent and eternal even while I am alive. So what to speak of finding the Tathagata when this form no longer manifests? The Tathagata is alive and in front of you, and yet you cannot comprehend him. Why do you think you can comprehend the Tathagata after his parinirvana?" The Buddha declared very clearly, "You will never find a Tathagata who is permanent and eternal even while the Tathagata is alive." We do not answer the 14 questions, not because of a lack of ability. Once answered, it is incorrect because these questions are based on mental categories such as birth and death, existence and non-existence, one and different. From the perspective of the middle way, concepts of presence and absence, existence and non-existence, one and different, finite and infinite, and so on, are merely mental categories that cannot convey the truth. Therefore, any answer cannot express the truth. Is it because we do not know that we do not answer, or because we know but refuse to answer? Matter and energy, according to modern science, are neither created nor destroyed, from clouds to fire, according to the first law of thermodynamics. Nothing is born, nothing dies, everything transforms, as scientist Antoine Lavoisier said. If things are neither born nor die, then they neither exist nor not exist, because the concepts of birth and death and existence and non-existence depend on each other to establish themselves. If there is no birth or death, how can there be eternal death or eternal life? If there is eternal death, then by principle, there must also be eternal life, right? Issue 3. The Dharma of the Buddha was presented so skillfully that it is called well-spoken. While the Dharma is exalted, if we do not present it skillfully, listeners might misunderstand, which could harm them. We must be very skillful in speaking the Dharma so that everything we say is well-spoken. Those who listen to the Dharma should also be skillful in understanding it correctly, without getting trapped in words and their own prejudices. There must be cooperation between the speaker of the Dharma and the listener. The speaker must see into the mind of the listener. How do we speak so that what we say reaches the listener's heart? The listener must open their heart, letting go of their prejudices to have the opportunity to receive the correct Dharma. Otherwise, what they take in may become harmful. The Sutra. The parable of the snake tells the story of the teacher Ajari who misinterpreted the Buddha's teaching, practiced it incorrectly, and obstinately refused the advice of other teachers. The Buddha called Ajari and said, "I did not say that. Why do you understand it this way?" And gave the example of a person who catches a snake. If one does not know how to catch a snake, that person will be bitten and die. When encountering a snake, the person who knows how to catch snakes will use a stick to press the snake's head down and grasp it just behind the head, not the tail. Listening to the Dharma is similar. If we are not skillful in understanding the Dharma correctly, then that Dharma will turn back and harm us. The Sutra. The parable of the snake is very unique, as no teacher has ever claimed that their teachings, if not used properly, can be very dangerous, like a medicine intended to save people but if used incorrectly, can kill.